general store. She was one of 4 children, with her siblings Ina, Tom, and Carol. JoJo always spoke fondly of her time in Ireland and the love she had for her family. Growing up, JoJo spent her time swimming, playing field hockey, running cross country, and spending time with her family. Jo met Malcolm McDonough when she was a teenager. They quickly fell in love and had a young romance. But life pulled them apart. Malcolm moved to Dublin for work, and while he was in Dublin, he saw a sign that read, "Come to Canada," and he was sold. Before Malcolm made his way to Canada, he did return to Limerick briefly a week before, and he saw Jo again. Then he hopped on a boat. Malcolm immigrated to Canada, and this was in 1955, and he ended up in BC. Malcolm and Jo wrote letters to each other for the next 2 years, and these letters were amazing. They were what romantic novels wish they were. After multiple letters, Jo sent some portraits of herself. They're up at my parents' house. They're stunning. She sent these photos of herself, and so Malcolm's response in the next letter was $2,000, asking her to get a plane ticket and to buy herself a ring and come join him in Canada. Jo spent all of that money on her ring and used her savings for the transportation. And she got so lucky because 2 years later, she wasn't on a boat, she got to go in a plane. Lucky girl. In 1957, so that's when she came over, at the age of 26, she immigrated to Canada to be with Malcolm, and she ended up in Kamloops, BC. Shortly afterwards, on December 26th, in the same year, they were married in Kamloops. Jo and Max started their family 5 years later in Prince George. My Uncle John was born in 1962, Maeve in 1963, and Stephen the year later, 1964. 3 years in a row, back to back. In 1965, so when my Uncle Stephen was just 1 year old, Jo and her family moved to Trail, BC. The family loved Trail, and Trail loved JoJo and her family. Jo's husband, Malcolm, he actually had several opportunities to move outside of Trail. He got offers for the Okanagan, Vancouver, but the desire to stay in the community of Trail caused them to stay put. Although JoJo had moved to Canada, she remained very close with her family back home in Ireland. She traveled back every 2 years, pretty much, and she did that throughout her whole life until she was quite old. She was, that helped her maintain her relationships with her family, and she also got to build new ones with her nieces and nephews. Over the years, many of Jo's family also came to visit here in Trail and in Vancouver. Some of them even got to stay with us. Okay, then things get sad. Sadly, in 1979, JoJo's love story came to an end. Malcolm passed away in 1979 at the age of 47, and JoJo raised her 3 teenagers by herself. Just take a moment. Okay, so that was 1979, and then by around 1985, I didn't fact check this, but it's around then, all 3 of Jo's children had moved to Vancouver. There wasn't much work for what they wanted in Trail, so they all moved and ended up living quite closely to each other. In 1988, the family started to grow. Maeve and Tom were married. In 1989, Uncle John and Auntie Gabby were married, and in 1994, Uncle Stephen and Auntie Carrie were married. In 1992, JoJo became a grandmother. Myself, Sarah Josephine, was born, and in that same year, my cousin Josh was born. Then there was a total of 6 grandchildren for JoJo. We were all born pretty close to each other. 1994, Jordan was born. 95, Emily. 97, Carly. And finally, in 1998, Jewel, the final child, was born. Jojo had been traveling back and forth from Trail to Port Coquitlam for over 10 years, sometimes staying for 2 months at a time. In 1996, the year after Emily was born, my mom and dad made a suite in our house, in our family house in Port Coquitlam, and Jojo moved in. Jojo was much more like a third sibling than a grandma. She was always teaching us to have fun. Jojo spent a lot of the time when she was in Poco with me and my cousins. She also spent her time visiting with old friends and making new friends. She loved playing bingo, going to water aerobics, driving around, and showing up places unannounced. Sometimes she would pop in at our schools, or pop in at a friend's house. She'd also accompany all of us on our family vacations, invited or not. And we all have fond memories of her at Christina Lake, and especially the big trip we took to Mexico, where her sister also joined us. Jojo had a presence that no one could miss. If you met her, you will never forget her. Almost through it. She taught me that stress and worry were a waste of time, and finding the joy and fun is how you stay young and live a fulfilled life. In 2018, Jojo moved into the Hawthorne Assisted Living. She really did love it there when she was first there. She got to hang out with so many people, and she loved being around people. She would sit in that bistro knitting and hanging with her pals, sometimes until 10 p.m. I loved visiting her there. She also showed great determination surviving throughout the COVID pandemic, and she never once complained. In 2020, Jojo became a great-grandmother when Malcolm Walter McDonough was born, and 2 years later, her great-granddaughter, Miller Lane McDonough, was born. Although COVID restrictions made it difficult, Granny Jo did get to meet Malcolm and Miller in person. It was a wonderful time for her and also for Josh and his family. Sadly, late last year, Jojo got very sick. She went to the hospital. So close. And then she moved into the Dufferin Care Center. Although she was in pain, she never complained. And she passed away gently on April 15th, 2023. Okay, that's all that I had. We'll take a little bit now. Next up, we have some stories about Jojo.